pick up on that.
Sure.
So the Israelis arrested a handful of these vigilantes and then have released most of them. So I'm wondering if you're satisfied with the Israeli response to that settler violence.
There's an ongoing investigation. We wouldn't want to get ahead of the investigation, but we think the equal administration of justice is important. It's important in every context around the world. It's important in this context. We want to see full accountability and legal prosecution of those responsible for these attacks and for compensation for those who lost property or were otherwise affected. And in the pursuit of that accountability and justice, we believe it should be pursued with equal rigor in all cases of extremist violence. And with that in mind, we believe there should be equal resources dedicated to the pursuit of that justice. Yes?
Hi. I noticed in your tweet yesterday you referred to the shooting in which 2 Israelis were killed as a terror attack or terrorism, whereas the settler violence was separated. Was that deliberate? And if yes, how do you differentiate or decide when to use the word terrorism versus when not to?
I think it's best not to parse and to go into definitions from the podium. We are condemning the extremist violence that we've seen over the past couple days. We issued a very strong condemnation of the killing of the Israelis that we've seen over the weekend. We've issued today a very strong condemnation of the violence that's resulted in the death of Palestinian and the destruction of property. In all of these cases, in all cases of extremist violence, we think it's important that there be accountability, that there be justice, equal justice under the law. Yes, Jenny.
Thank you. I have 2 questions.
Anything else before we leave the region? Okay. Sure.
I just wonder if any of this undermines the Aqaba statement. I mean, or do you think that statement is really alive still?
Well, the Aqaba statement is important in and of itself. It was a historic meeting between Israelis and Palestinians. Of course, senior U.S. officials were there, our Egyptian partners were there, our Jordanian partners were there, and the resulting communique and the commitments that Israelis and Palestinians made to one another, I think, speak for themselves. That's important, but what is equally, if not far more important, is the implementation, is the follow-through. And that's where we want to see Israelis and Palestinians fulfill the commitments that they have made to one another in Aqaba. Aqaba set out a path for both sides to de-escalate tensions and over the longer term to, we hope, build additional levels of trust between Israelis and Palestinians. But this is not a path that the United States or any other country in the region can itself walk down. This is a path that Israelis and Palestinians laid out for themselves, for one another. We hope, we expect that Israelis and Palestinians will themselves walk down that path, that practically speaking, they will take the steps that they've committed to and that will be necessary to de-escalate tensions. The de-escalation of tensions, especially now, is imperative. It was imperative prior to this weekend. It is even more important now, given that the violence that we've seen over the weekend, and now we have firm commitments from both sides and a clear roadmap from both sides that we think and we hope can lead to this de-escalation of tension that we so urgently need.
Will there be any other steps or follow-up steps after the announcement yesterday or the declaration, and what role did the U.S. play in convening this meeting?
Well, the United States played the role that we typically do play. We played the role as a partner. We helped bring the parties together. We're obviously grateful to our other partners in this, Egypt and Jordan, for the critical role that they've played, but we were there for the discussions. We supported the discussions. We welcomed the agreement that resulted from the discussions between Israelis and Palestinians and the other parties. As to the next steps, the most important next steps is follow-through, is to see to it that Israelis and Palestinians adhere to the commitments that they made to one another in Aqaba. They live up to the pledges that they have made to one another, but also importantly to the world. There is an agreement that emerged yesterday. It's important that it emerged publicly because the entire world is now able to see what the parties agreed to, and the entire world will be able to determine for themselves whether there is broad adherence to what was agreed to in Aqaba. That's certainly something we want to see because we think The discussions that took place over the weekend and the resulting communique do put a path forward for Israelis and Palestinians to do what is precisely necessary, and that is to engage in de-escalation, to de-escalate tensions, and over the longer term, we hope to build trust. Anything else on the Middle East?
Relaunch talks between Israel and Palestinians was on the agenda yesterday in that meeting, or?
Yesterday's agenda was fairly narrow in that it was aimed at de-escalation. We think the communique that emerged from this session was a concrete manifestation of the desire of the parties represented at Aqaba to see de-escalation. This is not about setting out an entire path forward to a negotiated two-state solution. That is something we still believe in, of course, but what is most urgent, what's most imperative at the moment, is that the parties themselves move forward with these steps that will, in the first instance, de-escalate tensions. Yes, go ahead.
Can't you do something to make it imperative, since it's been proven that the two parties were not able to do what you would like to see happening in terms of de-escalation and so on? So do you have anything to make it imperative?
Well, the parties and much of the world recognize that it is an imperative. I only speak for the United States of America, and we have consistently spoken of the importance of de-escalation. But the fact that Israelis and Palestinians, not to mention Egyptians and Jordanians, gathered in Aqaba over the weekend, we think, we hope, is a very concrete manifestation of the recognition on the part of the two parties, but also on the part of two very important regional players, that there needs to be de-escalation, that the imperative for de-escalation is an urgent one. The fact that the parties gathered, the fact that the two parties, in this case, were able to make commitments to one another that, again, put out that path towards de-escalation, we think is reflective of the fact that the parties themselves recognize the need to de-escalate. Again, however, what is most important is not the piece of paper that emerged, it is the follow-through. It is the test of whether the parties will be in a position to live up to the commitments that they have made to one another, that they have made to their regional neighbors, and that the United States was on the ground to witness. We certainly hope and expect that's the case. Yes?
The Israeli press is already reporting that some members of Netanyahu's government are saying that there will be no settlement freeze. Some of these members have been deemed outright fascistic. They've praised Baruch Goldstein, who massacred Palestinians. Isn't it imperative to address what they represent and what they are at this point?
None of these members are the Prime Minister of Israel. We work directly with the Prime Minister, with his team, with our direct counterparts. We are going to, and this applies to governments around the world, judge governments on their actions. We think it is important that Palestinians live up to the commitments they made at Aqaba. We think it's important that Israelis live up to the commitments that they've made at Aqaba.
Frida Parsi of the Quincy Institute just had a piece charging that the Biden administration has effectively given Israel a green light to possibly attack Iran. Is the administration in any way, shape, or form tacitly giving Israel a green light to attack Iran, and what would the administration response be to such an attack?
I'm happy to come back to that, but before we move on to Iran, anything else on ISPAL?
Yeah, I do.
We need to move around.
Is your reading of that Aqaba statement a settlement freeze? Because I think Bibi Netanyahu also said that it was not a settlement freeze.
The statement that was issued yesterday is one that the rest of the world can read. We think the statement speaks for itself. The Israelis agreed not to discuss any new settlements for at least 4 months, and not to discuss authorization of any new outposts for at least 6 months. Just as we expect the Palestinians to live up to their commitments, we expect the Israelis to do the same. Anything else? Yes, go ahead. One final question on this.
Palestinian commitments, what are those Palestinian commitments?
The statement at Aqaba is a document that the entire world can see for themselves.
But it doesn't mention what the Palestinian commitments are. But
This is a communique that was signed onto by the parties themselves, so would refer you to that statement. Janie, I know I called on you, and then we'll come back to Iran.
On
you.
Israel.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We'll take
Yeah,
a couple
so-
more questions on Israel. Go ahead.
Yeah, there is two reports. One of them says they agree to hold discussion on building more settlement, and the other one it says they agree to stop construction. Which one is, do you think, the true one, the real one?
The real one is the statement that was issued yesterday. This was a statement that was signed onto by the parties that you can read for yourself. We issued it from here, from the State Department. There was a statement from the White House yesterday welcoming the communique. That was agreed to at Aqaba. That's the one that we stand behind and that we hope and expect the parties will fulfill when it comes to their commitments. Yes, final question on this?
Yeah, I asked you about apparent Israeli violations of the Arms Export Act a week or two ago. And you said you weren't familiar with the laws that would cut off funding to any state that was a nuclear proliferator. Do you have anything further on that?
I believe the team provided you some additional background on that. As in the past, we're just not in a position to comment specifically on this. Would refer you and any questions you may have on this program.
How do you expect to have any credibility on this subject when you can't even acknowledge that Israel has a nuclear weapons arsenal?
Again, I just don't have anything to offer on this. We'd refer any questions to the Israeli government as a practice when it comes to just about any country, certainly any partner. We don't speak in detail to the capabilities, to the programs of partners around the world, just as we would expect they would not speak to ours.
You're
Yes, Danny, go
referring me
ahead.
to the Israeli government about their own nuclear program.
That's correct.
About their own nuclear
And,
program. You can't acknowledge
is,
that Israel has a nuclear weapons
One
program.
is China.